Good morning, everyone. Welcome to St. Luke's Sunday Forum. I am thrilled to have as my conversational partner today a person who is a friend, who is one of the most important thinkers in my life, a great writer, a philosopher, a theologian, a clergy person, and also another son of Georgia. He spent significant numbers of his young life in Noonan, Georgia, and has gone on to be a world famous philosopher and theologian. His name is Dr. John Cobb of Claremont University, and also the founder of the Center for Process Theology and Process Studies there. And we'll hear much more about that. But for right now, let me simply say, John Cobb, welcome to St. Luke's Church. It's great to have you.
Well, thank you.
I'm so grateful to you, and you know this because I've said it so many times, John. We've known one another since 1996, when I moved to Southern California, and we met then. And your essay, written in 2014 on Pando, actually changed my life. And I want you to talk a little bit about that. But before you do that, John, if you don't mind simply introducing yourself in terms of process theology, and give us a kind of an elementary tutorial about what distinguishes process theology from other theologies, both within Christianity and in all of religion.
Well, process theology is distinguished especially from mainstream, what shall I say, classical theology. And the term process suggests immediately what the difference is. The Indo-European languages, which of course include both Greek and Latin, they do not include Hebrew, give the noun the top role. And this was pointed out to me that when there is rain, a usual expression is, it is raining, even though there's no it to be raining. We just need to have something, and the technical term here is substance. And the creeds formulated in Greek are about substances. There's not a word about substances in the Bible, of course, because the Bible is a process book. But it's all about events. It's all stories. And in the New Testament, it's stories about a great storyteller. So I think it's important to understand that not everybody in the world thinks that substances are the fundamental reality, and that Jesus didn't think that way, Paul didn't think that way, but that Christianity was naturally conditioned by the language of the people who became Christian. And they did think that way. But we think that we would have been better off, and that we would be better off now if we shifted back to the pre-Romanized form of thinking. So that's what it means when we say process. In science, I could approach it in another field that might help. In science today, we talk about energy and matter. And matter is thought of as, excuse me, matter, the word matter doesn't appear in physics. The word mass appears, so I'll stick to the physics terms. There's mass and there's energy. And Einstein said they were convertible, which kind of then allowed one to think either way. And since most scientists thought in terms of substance, substance maintained its hold in science. But it doesn't work because there's lots of energy where there are no substances, no masses, that suggests that energy is primary, and energy isn't a substance. You find energy in events. So we think that process is the basic reality, that the world consists of events, of happenings, of occurrences. And in science, those are the quantum events, which are at the base of things. And we think that the Bible is all about process.
Yeah.
And that it got distorted when we thought of things in terms of substance. So we think it's really important to get back to a more biblical way of thinking. We think that was also the evidence of science supports it. And we can point out again and again where substance thinking has created insoluble problems.
Yeah. That's perfect. Okay, so let's just mark that right now. And one of the things that I'll never forget you're saying to me, John, was that it is very important to understand that human beings are walking events.
Mm-hmm.
Because all of that process is dynamic and it is going on in every human being in every breath. And that just changes all of theology and all of thinking in my mind.
But it builds on the Bible.
Yes.
And that's what we should do, I think.
As a good Methodist clergy person, I heard you say that we should build it all on the Bible, and I agree with you, my friend. So let's just make one point and name it process right now. Now I want to go to Pando. So the Pando story is this for me. Now, Pando is at least 13,000 years old, I understand. We can talk about that in just a second. And many people who will be listening to this will have heard me talk about Pando as the largest organism on the planet. It's a 106-acre root ball, 57,000 different trunks of quaking aspen, all discovered and proven in the late 60s to be one plant, not 57,000 different trunks. And because of you, I have now gone with you to see Pando in southern Utah. But let me tell the one quick story, and then I want you to comment on the significance of Pando for your thinking and for your teaching. And so here it is. You and I had known one another since 1995, 96. And at one point in your life, it was 2014, you wrote an essay entitled One More Thing Before I Go. And in just a minute, I want you to talk about why you entitled it that. And then you talked about the discovery that you had recently heard about Pando and this one tree forest. And I said, oh, my mind exploded. I wanted to learn more. I got in touch with you. I got in touch with your colleague, Eugene Shirley. And all of a sudden, I was signed up to get on a bus with my wife and you and 40 other people to actually go to see Pando. And it was an amazing experience. And we've had a second pilgrimage. And for me, it's my favorite icon for the reality of oneness, interdependence, and the interwovenness of all humanity and all of creation. Now that's enough for me to say. Now I want you to tell the story from your perspective of your hearing about Pando and with you and your thinking and why you wrote that particular essay, John.
Well, the issue of one of the worst features of modernity is its substantialization of individual human beings. Economic theory is based entirely on that. That is, the economic theory taught in our universities is. Marxism is different and so forth. But it's such a powerful idea that the world is, the human world is made up of human individuals. And if we can satisfy the desires of these human individuals, things go well. And the human individuals are not interested in relationships with each other because substances really are not influenced by other substances. So I think that our economic theory and much of the theory that governs our other social sciences is based on this view of individuals. And I find that Pando shows us individual trunks. I'm going to just call them individual trees because that's what they look like. Okay.
Right, right.
And these trees are there, and each one is different from the others a little bit. But we know that, in fact, these trees can only survive by the whole root ball. They belong to each other. You cannot have some of them thriving and others dying. If some of them start dying, that would mean the death of the root, of that part of the root ball, and the whole root ball will suffer. So it suggests to me that we simply have based our entire thinking about ourselves in the modern world on a false image. And the truth is that we exist only in communion with each other. That doesn't mean that we're not individuals. I mean, these tree trunks are really tree trunks. They're really separate from each other. They really are separate, distinct trees. And we don't want to give up the fact that there are people. I like the term persons. Persons are the reality.
Yes, yes.
But persons are not individuals in the way that individualism develops. Persons are products of whole communities. This is one of the topics on which I like Paul Tillich very much. He writes about persons in community. And the point is, there's no community without there being persons. And there's no person without there being community. So it's not at all the more you emphasize persons, the less you emphasize community. You see, if you have individuals, and then let's call it individuals in society, just meaning there are a lot of individuals, and we call the whole group of individuals society, then we can say, as was the case between capitalists and communists, communists tended to, because they also had substance, so they substantialized the whole group of them. And the more you emphasize the commune, the less distinct are the roles of the individuals who make it up. And with capitalism, the more you emphasize that everything is a matter of individuals, individual choices, and so forth, the less you pay any attention to the group. And it really goes down to zero. The word community does not appear in economic textbooks.
Wow. So, John, let's come back to that. We're going to bracket that for just a second. Tell the story about that essay. That was a really powerful essay for me. And I would refer our readers, our viewers, just to Google one more thing before I go, John Cobb. And if you could just say something about that essay, and then I want to come back and unpack this business about persons, community, and individualization.
Well, as I recall, and you remember the essay much better than I do, I'm afraid. But my great concern was that we build a different civilization, and we build a civilization which we use the word ecology instead of community because we wanted to make sure we were including the wider natural world. But ecology is for plants and animals, including human beings, what community is simply for human beings. No part of it can flourish if another part of it is being destroyed. And all parts benefit as the whole benefits. So we need a civilization based on that kind of thinking. And so the conference that I was planning was about moving in the direction of an ecological civilization. And I really mean a different civilization, just as a modern civilization is different from medieval civilization. That's different from Roman civilization. The change from modern civilization to ecological civilization is just as great. It's not going back to something we once had. There was a time civilization was and maybe some people feel like it is inherently, but historically, civilization came into being as human beings began to impose their needs and their concerns upon the natural world in ways that were distorting of the natural world. I mean, that's what agriculture was. So we became civilized by insisting on our interests replacing the well-being of the natural world. Yeah. And all civilizations have done that. So finding a way to turn our relationship with nature into our being part of an ecology is just even the idea that we ought to be doing something like that is, it's not easy to get across. People are too deeply settled into a way of understanding civilization.
So that raises for me, John, and we don't have time to go into it very deeply, but the whole notion of consciousness. You can have your consciousness shaped and formed by an individualistic approach to life as opposed to an ecological approach to life. And when you are in that consciousness, you can have a bit of a paradigm paralysis so that you cannot see that ecological civilization thinking is actually life-giving to you, your relationships, your systems, and your planet. Is that correct?
That's correct. I did not want to say that all civilizations were emphasizing individuals.
Right.
That is especially modern civilization.
Got it.
So one can find it in various degrees. But when we go to the East, even today, we sense a difference in terms of the typical Chinese or Japanese or Koreans sense of who he or she is.
Yes.
And there are some features of our individualism, though I don't like to even call it individualism, but of our emphasis upon the individual person that I think have been very valuable. When I speak against the fundamental assumptions of modernity, I don't want to wipe it all out.
Sure.
And I think that personal existence is something we have gotten from the Bible.
And personal existence is resonant with attending to the importance of individuals without, and it doesn't require, however, that you wipe out the notion and sensitivities and sensibilities about community.
On the contrary, you see, you can't, we can authentically mean by a community is possible only if we have persons.
True, yeah.
And the more fully the personalities of the individuals who are members of the community are developed, the richer it is for the community as a whole.
Yes.
It's the more, not the more, the less. And it's so much more, the less thinking that has dominated modernity. I think it's dominated most civilizations, actually, but you can go either way. And because you think the more individuals are claiming their own rights and privileges, the harder it is to maintain social order. There are many, many civilizations that have simply wanted the individual to subordinate himself.
Right. So just to kind of get a sentence that encapsulates what we're connecting Pando with ecological civilization, is to say that Pando is a symbol, a living, breathing symbol of this ecological civilization rather than this strident individualism without any sense of community.
And Pando illustrates some of what we want to illustrate very beautifully.
Yeah.
It shows how easily we can be fooled by encountering something and saying, oh, that's an individual. What a great individual.
Yes.
But the great individual is great because that individual has been able to appropriate so much from other people.
Yes. Yeah.
It's the openness to the other that creates strong personality.
Yes.
And just being continuous with your past self, you're going to be a rather impoverished individual.
Indeed. Indeed.
Mm-hmm.
So John, when we have talked about process and the importance of that over focusing on substance, we have talked about Pando as an illustration of an ecological civilization as opposed to holding up individuals who are out there without being tethered to community. And that's the second beat. The fourth beat, I'm going to signal the fourth beat and come back to a third beat. So the fourth beat is going to be how we proceed in terms of building this new civilization to reconstruct something that is deconstructing before our very eyes. But before we get to that, I want to talk about religion, okay?
Mm-hmm.
And Christianity and Jesus and God. I want to just simply pose to you, aren't you saying, John Cobb, that you can be so focused on individuals untethered from community
Mm-hmm.
that you misunderstand or distort the nature of Jesus and the mission and message of Jesus? Is that an accurate thing to say?
Sure. And I think historians, I mean, one of the things I'm really unhappy about is the way that genuine history is disappearing from our universities, and I think from our schooling system. But when genuine history was really around, and you studied Jesus in a historical way, you understood that Jesus was not separate from the community in which he grew up. It doesn't mean he wasn't creative and original, but Jesus could not have happened 500 years earlier, or probably even 50 years earlier, because it was the situation at that time, the people at that time, the thinking at that time, which could give rise to him. And that's true of every great figure. It's not, I happen to think of Jesus as the greatest of all, so I can use him as my example. But emphasizing that how different he is from everybody else is not a, he may have had very few ideas that other rabbis had not had.
Got it.
But he could benefit from all of that. He could build on all of that.
Right.
And it's precisely that openness to what's going on. And his willingness to be taught by a Samaritan woman, Sorrowfinishing woman,
Right.
is an example of that. I think that shows greatness.
Yes.
You
Okay.
don't show greatness by just sticking to what you believe.
Indeed.
So, yes.
So let's just remind everybody about the Sorrowfinishing woman. It's a thrilling story where, in effect, Jesus is a closed system thinker about those beneficiaries of his ministry, and she challenged him and opened him up. I mean, how do you tell that story?
Oh, I think you've told it. That's great.
It's, I mean,
that's the whole point. When we talk about loving others, the others that we are to love don't have to be just people who are like ourselves. If there is truly a single original teaching of Jesus, and this probably can be found in an anticipated form elsewhere, that's fine, I don't care. But when he says, you have been told to love your neighbor, well, yeah, that's fine. He certainly doesn't disagree. But what is really important is that we love our enemies. And of course, I would like to say maybe love our opponents, because obviously when you love them, enemy is not quite the right term, but they can still be opponents, very strong opponents.
yes.
And it certainly means you love those who you're not indifferent to anybody. You don't close yourself off from anybody. Yeah. So I think this is an illustration. And it was a really radical thing, because I think Jesus' mission, I think Jesus understood himself to be Messiah. And I think he understood that the Messiah's role had to do with the nation of Israel. And it had to do with saving Israel. And Israel needed to be saved, both from enslavement to the Romans, but also from its suicidal behavior.
Right. So here we have the communal consciousness again, right?
Yes. Oh, yes. No, he was very much a Jew and understood himself to be a Jew and understood his mission to be. So when this woman comes along and tells him, I don't think she was saying you shouldn't care about what happens to the Jewish people.
Right.
But you mustn't be indifferent to what happens to us either.
Right.
And Jesus learned.
John, another thing that Jesus said changed for me in my experiential heart and soul after you and I went together to Pando. When I saw that not one of those trees or trunks could look at the other as an other,
Mm-hmm.
I began to understand Jesus saying, love your neighbor as yourself, that your neighbor is yourself. And that's how you love a neighbor. It's not like be such a loving person that you brim over with love for other people. No, actually, other people are not other. They are yourself. I didn't have that experiential understanding until I went to Pando.
Hmm.
Is that your understanding of Jesus's statement about loving your neighbor as yourself?
I think that we don't want to do away with otherness.
Okay.
I see this as a problem when people talk about dealing with other religions, for example.
Yes.
Too often they say, well, Buddhism is a religion, Christianity is a religion, so they have to be doing the same thing. Ultimately, they just seem to be different. It's different paths up the same mountain. And I think that's a mistake. We need to listen very carefully and allow the difference to be there. And say, yes, Buddhism has something different. It has an otherness, and that otherness is what challenges me.
Yeah.
Because that otherness doesn't mean badness, it means opportunity.
Ah.
I can expose myself to something very different. So, I mean, there's a truth in what you were saying too, but I'm worried that it might exclude the recognition that we must respect the otherness of the other person.
Thanks for clarifying that. I think that really is a very important corrective and kind of both and statement to what I was saying. That's really helpful. Thank you. So I'm now want to segue into our blueprint for the future in terms of the ecological civilization. But I don't want to do that too quickly, John. And if you need to say something else about religion and the distortion of God and Jesus as an underpinning for a civilization that's not working, I do want you to say that, if you have anything to say about that.
Well, I think that the use of the word religion has created lots of confusion. And so we think the more religious you are, the better Christian you are, the better Buddhist you are. But actually, the people that Jesus was most critical of were the religious people of his time. The Pharisees were very religious people. And if you go back to Amos and Hosea and Isaiah and Jeremiah, they're very critical of religion. So we can, of course, redefine religion. And if we mean by religion a way of binding things together, then I think Jesus just simply has a different way of binding things together than the Pharisees. But the word religion tends to emphasize some very different things from what Jesus emphasized, or what Isaiah emphasized, or what Amos emphasized. I hate your feasts. That's not an uncommon expression of the prophets.
Yeah.
But the feasts were very central to the religious life of the time. So I think religiousness it can be understood in so many different ways. I think there's a kind of religiousness that characterizes the university that is created out of being anti-religious. But the religions of India are different from the teachings of the great saints of India.
Got it.
So
Go ahead.
So
Go ahead.
you know, Karl Barth said Christianity is not a religion. Most Buddhists don't like Buddhism to be called a religion. Most Hindus don't like Hinduism to be called a religion. Is Confucianism a religion? I mean, I'm not sure that there are any religions, but there is a certain, and then I think it's a poor term to use.
I
If what
understand.
we are talking about are the axial traditions.
Yes. So, John, is there a word or a phrase or a value or a dynamic that distinguishes, let's call it the religion of Jesus, from the religiousness that he criticized?
Mhm. Well, I like to, I mean, I've tried various things. I sometimes talk about the axial ways because in the middle of the first millennium before Jesus, there was the rise, we might say, out of the religious culture of a critique of that religious culture. And the way Gautama related to the religious culture of his day is very different from the way Isaiah related to the religious culture of his day. And both are very different from the way Confucius, but all of them have something in common. That doesn't mean they're all the same. I think their otherness is also impressive, but all of them bring about or allow for and require and nourish and develop kind of responsibility on the part of individuals, individual persons, I would like to say. I think they become, I think prior to that, to talk about persons is probably somewhat questionable.
So,
but sometimes we say the great axial ways.
got it. So, just we're going to go to the fourth beat in just a second, but you used the word responsible just now.
Yes.
And I've heard you speak about the difference between having a rather deterministic perspective on life, that it's all determined, and then exercising responsibility. Could you say a word about that, please?
Yeah. Well, from my point of view, this is after Darwin, this became an enormous problem for Western education, and the wrong side won. So that the actual teaching of higher education, but that then filters down into other forms of education, is that we're all zombies. We know we are not, but anytime you try to indicate how we are not, you're working against the academic disciplines.
Got it.
So that, whereas as long as we were working with the Cartesian world, nature was treated that way, including your pet dog, which no one really believed, but nevertheless, you know what I mean. If as a scholar and a thinker, you believe one thing, as a human being dealing with this dog, you really think in a different way. That's been true. That's been more true in modernity than in previous epochs. But when you say, you at least then say, but human beings, they are souls. Souls are responsible. They're free. Okay. But then when you say, oh no, human beings are just like the other animals, and the other animals are all determined, so we're all determined too. So we invest billions of dollars in teaching our children that they are not persons.
Wow. What an indicting thing to say. So we'll one day unpack that some more, but we must wrap this up, unfortunately, because our time is limited. And so I've also heard you say, John, that civilization as we have constructed it is, now I'm not sure you use the word imploded, You may have used the word not sustainable, not working. But we see all around us that the civilization that we have depended on and we have kind of staked our lives on is not producing. And you have, in a visionary way, talked about this new civilization, which is called the ecological civilization. And it really does give us some hope and also a kind of a blueprint. I mean, I know the map is not the terrain, but you do give me some hope that we can create a new civilization that has this ecological dimension to it. Can you say a few words about that?
Yes. Yes, well, I can say that having been advocating through most of my career radical changes, and I won't say nobody listens, but very few people hear. And I think in the last 5 years, the number of people who hear has greatly increased. And it's extremely, I mean, I'm kind of glad to have kept living after I should have been gone, but because it's personally very gratifying. I would just give one example of a change. I'm a follower of the philosopher Alfred North Whitehead. He is the greatest process philosopher. And his most demanding book, and of course also most important book, is called Process and Reality. And I've been one of the few teachers of that book in our country, but I've only taught it in seminars with graduate students. And references to it, for the most part, from other people have just been dismissive. But a friend invited me to give a series of lectures, not just on Whitehead, that would be wonderful, but on that book. And I said, okay. I thought if we could get 50 people to actually deal with that book seriously, that would be wonderful. More than 1,000 signed up.
Wow.
Now that would not have happened 5 years ago, I can tell you.
So
but
what has
there
changed?
is a sense that what we have been doing and what we have been teaching are not working. So the fact that something is very different and it's hard to understand because it's different from all of our habits of thinking, we got to do it anyway. I think that change is actually happening now. I mean, in one section of it, but
Right.
so much more widely than was true in the past.
Right.
And I think that the fact that in Black Lives Matter movement, the issue about policing has not just been, can we make it done better, less violently, and so forth. We've actually raised the question, do we need policing? That is not the kind of thing that has happened before.
I see.
It's the kind of thing I thought was needed, you understand.
Yes.
We need to rethink, do we need schools? If so, for what? We don't. We just do schools because we've always had schools. Well, we haven't always had schools. And until we ask that radical question about all of our basic institutions, we don't have a chance of constructing a new civilization. But we do know when we have ecological economics. I don't mean that we have it practiced. I just mean the theory of ecological farming. And I think in other fields also, well, I think that when we are questioning, do we need policing, and asking these questions, often community comes to the fore. So I think that there has been thinking about policing that belongs to the category of ecological thinking. So I don't think that it's that we are blankly ignorant of what ecological civilization would be. There are people who have thought through most of the needed things. But thus far, they have been kept out of the decision-making realms, and that cities are actually asking the question, do we need to keep on policing? That has become, that's a sign of a crack in the army of modernity. So I would say, in the sense that Jesus said, the basileia theou, the kingdom of God, is at hand, we can say ecological civilization is at hand.
Powerful, powerful, powerful. I would love to take about a day to breathe all this in. And so what I want to promise is that I want to pursue you for some more time to unpack all of that. Just to think about the fact that the ecological civilization reality seems to be ready to come to the fore. It is at hand, and it can help us through raising these very basic questions like, do we need all of the institutions we've counted on in the past?
Okay, but that's
Thanks, John. Thank you very, very, very much. We will get back together. And I want to thank everybody who has been with us for these 45 minutes with Professor John Cobb. We will continue to unpack his teaching. We will also put on our website John's books. And one of my favorites is named Jesus's Abba, which is his latest book, which unpacks his own unique theology in line with process thinking. It's a very rich way to look, and for me, a very hopeful way. And we could call this Pando theology because it is a theology, a perspective on life, a form of connecting us together that is illustrated by that wonderful tree, that one tree forest, Pando in southern Utah. Google it and we'll put up information about that on our website again. Thank you, John Cobb. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I've enjoyed it.
I have too. And thank you all. See you next Sunday.